What happened? We caught the plane, man!
Welcome to Con Air.
Jailbird 1, you are not cleared for takeoff.
Ain't nobody on this aircraft gives a flying.
The issue here is...
One of the most anticipated movies this summer is Con Air. As you can see, it's an action-packed thriller about dangerous criminals who hijack a plane. Well, Matt Meagher has uncovered a real-life situation in which violent criminals are flying every single day, and you and your family could be sitting right next to them.
What you are watching is something the federal government would prefer that you didn't see. The men boarding this United Airline flight to El Salvador are convicted criminals. An hour ago, these men were in locked cells. They were brought to the airport on a prison bus by armed officers of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. They're now being loaded onto the plane from the tarmac.
I think it's a disgusting threat to public safety.
This man should know. He's a longtime INS officer.
These are people that have committed very serious crimes. Violent assaults, robberies, armed robbery, rape, everything under the sun.
U.S. Immigration, federal agents, open the door.
Because they aren't U.S. citizens, INS calls them criminal aliens. They have served their prison sentences and are now being kicked out of the country.
They're basically put on the airplanes without any armed or otherwise supervised escort, put on the airplanes and said, here's your Greyhound bus. You're going to be leaving the country. Bye. Have a nice day.
Earlier this month, the INS proudly announced it has removed more than 23,000 criminal aliens in the last 6 months.
It's important to remember that each time INS removes one of those criminal aliens, we take another dangerous person off our streets and out of our communities.
And right onto commercial airliners, where they'll be seated right next to passengers who have no idea who they are. And get a load of this. The guards get back on the bus. The criminals take off without any type of guard or escort.
The potential consequences are horrific.
Airline Captain Stephen Luckey heads the security committee of the National Airline Pilots Association.
They've attacked passengers, they've fought with themselves, they've thrown food, they've thrown beverages around, become fairly disruptive. And some of them, in a few incidents, have become violent.
And when they do become violent, all too often, their victims are women and children. Just 2 months ago, a 12-year-old girl traveling unaccompanied from Los Angeles to El Salvador was fondled by a criminal deportee. She had been seated among 24 unescorted criminal aliens. In a report on the incident by a United official, she wrote, "Could INS escort these people to avoid these kinds of incidents? Other passengers reported deportees had been drinking. Flight attendants are not able to control these situations." Surprisingly, INS officials in Washington deny that they transport large groups of criminal aliens on commercial flights.
Normally, criminal aliens are removed one by one. Each case as it comes up.
John O'Malley is the #2 man in the INS's Division of Detention and Deportation.
So that we don't usually move groups of criminal aliens, usually individuals that are moved.
I think that Mr. O'Malley needs to go down to LAX and find out exactly how many of these criminals straight from jail are being put aboard these commercial aircraft.
They're going out in large groups on a regular basis, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
On this flight alone, our hidden camera recorded more than 24 criminal aliens being boarded by INS guards. Their first taste of freedom after serving time in prison will be on this flight. On another evening, we watched as 10 criminal deportees were boarded on a different flight to Guatemala. INS uses a variety of airlines to fly deportees to Central and South America as well as Europe.
If there's any type of danger or safety concerns, we will escort them all the way home.
INS sources say that's simply not true. There were no escorts on any of the flights we observed. And INS and airline insiders say that's typical. The fact is, the government seldom provides escorts, even for groups as large as 40 or 50 criminals.
But are you sending large groups of people just released from prisons after serving long sentences, putting them on airplanes and sending them back to the countries where they came from?
Not in large groups.
Well, pilots and flight crews are outraged by INS packing convicted criminals on commercial flights. The airlines themselves appear less bothered. A spokesman for United said the airline doesn't consider this to be a serious problem, saying there have been only a few isolated incidents with deportees. But flight crews say it's more than a slight problem. They say it's a disaster waiting to happen.
What a powder keg. It's becoming an intolerable situation.
There is growing interest on Capitol Hill to hold the INS accountable for the transportation of deportees out of this country. We'll stay on top of this story.